the dark story of Maduro's secret mansions, while Venezuela starves. In the exclusive resort community of Cap Cana, Dominican Republic, where the Caribbean Sea sparkles under an endless tropical sun, sits a mansion that tells one of the most obscene stories of our time, Villa La Caracola. A 32,000-square-foot palace with 9 bedrooms, each with its own private terrace overlooking the ocean. An infinity pool that seems to merge with the Caribbean horizon. A gourmet kitchen, a gazebo, a semi-covered bar. 2 master suites with balconies where someone can sip champagne while watching the sun set over waters so blue they seem unreal. This mansion, valued at approximately $18 million, is just one piece of a portfolio of luxury properties allegedly connected to Nicolás Maduro, the man who has ruled Venezuela while his country collapsed into one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in modern history. While Maduro's family allegedly enjoyed this Caribbean paradise, 82% of Venezuelans were living in poverty. While someone swam in that infinity pool, children in Caracas were dying from malnutrition in hospitals that had no medicine. While someone slept in those 9 bedrooms with their ocean views, nearly 8 million Venezuelans fled their country, walking through jungles and across borders, desperate to escape a nation that had become unlivable. This is the story of Maduro's secret mansions, of the billions allegedly stolen from a country that was once the richest in South America, of luxury properties in Florida, yachts, private jets, horse farms, and millions in jewelry and cash, all accumulated while a nation starved. If this story matters to you, take a moment to subscribe and support the channel. Your support means everything, and I want to hear from you in the comments. How should the world respond to leaders who loot their countries while their people suffer? What does justice look like for the millions of Venezuelans whose lives were destroyed by corruption on this scale? Leave your thoughts below. Chapter 1. The Man Who Rose from Nothing. To understand the obscenity of Maduro's alleged wealth, you first have to understand where he came from. Because Nicolás Maduro Moros did not inherit money. He did not build a business empire. He did not create anything that generated legitimate wealth. He was a bus driver. Born in 1962 in a working-class neighborhood of Caracas, Maduro grew up in a modest family that struggled like millions of other Venezuelan families. He dropped out of high school before graduating. He worked as a bus driver for the Caracas metro system, earning a salary that would have barely covered the costs of living in Venezuela's capital. But Maduro had something that would prove more valuable than education or business acumen: political ambition and connections. In the late 1980s, he became involved in union organizing and leftist politics. He caught the attention of Hugo Chavez, the charismatic military officer who was building a revolutionary movement that promised to transform Venezuela. When Chavez was imprisoned for leading a failed coup attempt in 1992, Maduro was among those who campaigned for his release. It was during this period that Maduro met Celia Flores, a lawyer who was working on Chavez's legal case. They would eventually marry after a relationship spanning more than 2 decades, a union that would place both of them at the center of allegations of massive corruption. Chavez was released from prison in 1994 and went on to win the presidency in 1998. He brought Maduro with him into government. The former bus driver became a member of the National Assembly in 2000. He served as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2013. He became vice president in 2012, just months before Chavez's death from cancer in 2013. When Chavez died, Maduro inherited the presidency and the vast apparatus of power that came with it. He also inherited control over PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil company, which sat on top of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. At its peak, PDVSA generated billions of dollars in revenue every year. It was, for whoever controlled it, essentially a license to print money. And according to prosecutors, investigators, and witnesses across multiple countries, Maduro and his inner circle treated it exactly that way. Chapter 2. The mansions emerge. For years, rumors circulated about the hidden wealth of Venezuela's ruling elite. Opposition journalists and investigators documented suspicious assets, luxury lifestyles that seemed impossible on government salaries, properties in foreign countries that no public official could legitimately afford. But the true scale of the alleged looting did not become clear until law enforcement agencies in the United States, Europe, and other countries began to piece together the evidence. What they found was staggering. In August 2025, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that the United States had seized more than $700 million worth of assets, allegedly connected to Maduro, his family, and his closest associates. The assets included multiple luxury homes in Florida, a mansion in the Dominican Republic, 2 private jets, a Dassault Falcon 200 and a Dassault Falcon 900EX, purchased for $13 million through shell companies, a horse breeding farm, 9 luxury vehicles, millions of dollars in jewelry. Cash reserves scattered across accounts in multiple countries. These assets include 2 multi-million-dollar jets, multiple homes, a mansion in the Dominican Republic, several million-dollar homes in Florida, a horse farm, 9 vehicles, luxury cars, and millions of dollars in jewelry and cash, Bondi said. She described Maduro's network as an organized crime operation, no different than the mafia. The Dominican mansion, Villa La Caracola, became the most visible symbol of this alleged corruption. Located in Cap Cana, one of the most exclusive resort developments in the Caribbean, the property sits on approximately 64,000 square feet of oceanfront land. The mansion itself covers more than 32,000 square feet of living space, with amenities that most Venezuelans could not imagine even in their dreams. 9 bedrooms, each with en-suite bathrooms and private terraces. 10 bathrooms in total. A formal dining room, a gourmet kitchen, multiple terraces for outdoor entertaining, a palapa for shade, an infinity-edge pool, 2 master suites with balconies overlooking the Caribbean Sea, a gazebo, a semi-covered bar, spacious entertainment areas both indoors and outdoors. The surrounding complex offered additional luxuries, a helipad for arriving by private helicopter, restaurants, gyms, spas, shops, bike paths, a church, and 24-hour security to ensure that the wealthy residents would never be disturbed by the outside world. This was allegedly how Maduro's network lived while Venezuelans starved. Chapter 3. The Florida Connection. If the Dominican Republic mansion was the most spectacular of Maduro's alleged properties, the Florida holdings revealed the systematic nature of the alleged corruption. Miami and its surrounding areas had become a haven for Venezuelan money, both legitimate and illicit, and investigators found that the Maduro network had allegedly exploited this haven extensively, using the openness of American real estate markets to hide wealth stolen from the Venezuelan people. The specific locations of the seized Florida properties have not been fully disclosed by the U.S. government, which has kept certain details confidential for ongoing investigative purposes. But court documents and investigative reports have painted a picture of a network that funneled hundreds of millions of dollars from Venezuela's oil wealth into South Florida luxury real estate, a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the origins of the money and the identities of its true owners. A 2022 investigation called Miami Nostro, conducted jointly by the Venezuelan investigative outlet Armando.info and the Miami Herald, revealed how hundreds of Venezuelan political and military elites had channeled money into Florida properties and businesses. The investigation, which took years to complete, documented a web of shell companies, straw buyers, and complex financial arrangements designed to hide the true ownership of assets from authorities and from the Venezuelan public whose money had been stolen. The investigators found that Miami had become a kind of second capital for Venezuelan elites, a place where they could enjoy the wealth they had accumulated through corruption while remaining close enough to Venezuela to continue their looting. They bought condos in luxury towers, mansions in exclusive suburbs, commercial properties that generated income while hiding their origins. They enrolled their children in expensive private schools. They dined in fine restaurants and shopped in luxury stores. They lived the American dream on stolen Venezuelan money. The properties allegedly connected to Maduro's network included condos in some of Miami's most exclusive buildings, towers where a single unit could cost millions of dollars. Mansions in wealthy suburbs like Pinecrest, where the lawns are manicured and the security is tight. Waterfront properties with private docks where yachts could anchor away from prying eyes. The common thread was luxury, anonymity, and distance from the chaos of Venezuela. For someone living in these properties, Venezuela might as well have been on another planet, a distant memory of a country left behind. The air conditioning always worked, keeping the tropical heat at bay. The water was always clean, flowing clear from faucets that never failed. The refrigerator was always full, stocked with whatever food the occupant desired. The electricity never went out for days at a time, never left the house dark and silent while the food spoiled. It was everything that Venezuela had once been and had ceased to be under Maduro's rule. The comfortable life that ordinary Venezuelans had once enjoyed, now available only to those who had stolen enough to afford it in a foreign country. The bitter irony was not lost on Venezuelan refugees who saw these properties, who knew that the wealth on display had been taken from their country while they struggled to survive. Chapter 4. The Stepsons and Los Chamos. If Maduro was allegedly at the top of the corruption pyramid, his stepsons were allegedly key operators within the network. Known in Venezuelan slang as Los Chamos, meaning the kids, Yosual, Yoser, and Walter Gavidia Flores were the children of First Lady Celia Flores from a previous relationship. U.S. Prosecutors alleged that Los Chamos were involved in a scheme to siphon $1.2 billion from PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company. The investigation became one of the largest money laundering cases ever lodged against Venezuelan officials and their associates. In court documents filed in Miami federal court, a Swiss banker named Matthias Krull admitted that he had plotted with men identified only as Los Chamos to launder $200 million of stolen PDVSA funds. The money allegedly flowed through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and real estate investments designed to hide its origins. The three brothers had different profiles. Yosual and Yoser kept relatively low profiles and never held a public office. Walter, the oldest, was appointed by Maduro in 2014 to head a government-financed foundation focused on social assistance programs for the poor. The irony was painful. A man allegedly stealing billions was put in charge of helping the poor. Investigators discovered that the brothers allegedly used straw owners, intermediaries who held assets in their own names to disguise the true beneficiaries. One such alleged straw owner, Mario Enrique Bonilla Valera, was linked to at least 22 companies in Florida, Mauritius, Panama, and Venezuela. He became a fugitive when the investigation closed in. The stepsons were eventually sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department in 2019. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin described them as gatekeepers to Venezuelan public officials and accused them of participating in corruption that exploited Venezuela's starving population. Saab engaged with Maduro insiders to run a wide-scale corruption network they callously used to exploit Venezuela's starving population. Mnuchin said, referring to Alex Saab, a Colombian businessman who worked closely with the Maduro network. They use food as a form of social control to reward political supporters and punish opponents, all the while pocketing hundreds of millions of dollars through a number of fraudulent schemes. Chapter 5. The jets that crossed oceans. Among the most striking assets seized from the Maduro network were two private jets, a Dassault Falcon 200 and a Dassault Falcon 900EX. These aircraft represented more than just transportation. They represented a lifestyle of international mobility that was completely divorced from the reality of ordinary Venezuelans. According to the Department of Justice, the jets were purchased through U.S.-based front companies and then illegally transferred abroad for Maduro's personal use. One of the aircraft was purchased for $13 million. It had been stored for months at the Joaquin Balaguer International Airport in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, where it was undergoing luxury upgrades including leather seating and custom fittings. The jets allegedly used U.S. parts in violation of export controls, giving American authorities jurisdiction to seize them, when Dominican and U.S. officials conducted the joint operation to take the aircraft. They found interiors designed for comfort and luxury that would rival any first-class cabin in the world. For Maduro, these jets allegedly provided something invaluable: the ability to move freely between Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and other allied nations. While ordinary Venezuelans could not afford bus fare, while migrants walked thousands of miles through the deadly Darien Gap jungle, the first family allegedly traveled in private jets equipped with every possible amenity. The symbolism was not lost on investigators. This is organized crime, no different than the mafia, Attorney General Bondi said, yet his reign of terror continues. Chapter 6. The numbers of starvation. To understand the true obscenity of Maduro's alleged wealth, you have to understand what was happening to ordinary Venezuelans while these mansions and jets were being accumulated. The statistics are not just numbers. They are a chronicle of human suffering on a scale that defies comprehension. According to Human Rights Watch, over 20 million Venezuelans, out of a population of 28.8 million, live in multidimensional poverty. That means they lack not just income, but access to basic services like healthcare, education, clean water, and adequate housing. More than 14 million face severe humanitarian needs. These are numbers that would constitute a catastrophic emergency in any context, but in Venezuela, they have become the permanent condition of daily life. The statistics are almost incomprehensible in their scale and their implications. By 2017, hunger had escalated to the point where almost 75% of the population had lost an average of over 8 kilograms, more than 19 pounds, in body weight. This was not a diet trend or a fitness program. It was mass starvation in a country that sits on more oil wealth than any nation on earth. More than half the population did not have enough income to meet their basic food needs. The Venezuelan humanitarian organization Hum Venezuela reported that 5.1 million people face hunger. Not food insecurity, which is a broader category. Actual hunger, the gnawing emptiness that makes it impossible to think about anything else. The weakness that comes from a body consuming itself because there is nothing else to consume. The desperation that drives people to eat from garbage or to hunt stray animals or to simply give up. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food identified multiple factors hindering access to food, including the economic collapse that has made the minimum wage essentially worthless. The rapporteur also noted the political instrumentalization of state food programs, the use of food as a weapon to reward supporters and punish opponents. In Venezuela, eating became a political act, dependent on loyalty to the regime. How worthless is the minimum wage? The official minimum wage in Venezuela is approximately $4 per month. The cost of a basic monthly food basket is approximately $540. That means a Venezuelan family needs about 250 times the minimum monthly wage just to buy basic food. It is an equation that makes survival mathematically impossible for most people. It is an equation that forces families to make impossible choices: food or medicine, food or transportation, food or rent. Nearly 82% of the population lives in poverty. More than 53% lives in extreme poverty, with income insufficient to access even basic food. According to surveys, 89% of households report experiencing food insecurity. These are not numbers from a war zone or a natural disaster. These are numbers from a country with vast natural resources, deliberately impoverished by its own government. The healthcare system has collapsed in ways that would be unimaginable in any developed country. 70% of the population has lost access to health system services, both public and private. Essential medicines are unavailable at nearly 30% of pharmaceutical dispensaries, and those that are available are unaffordable for most people. People die of preventable diseases because hospitals have no medicine, no equipment, and sometimes no electricity to power the machines that could save lives. Inflation has destroyed what little purchasing power Venezuelans had. Expected to reach 270% or more, inflation means that whatever money people manage to earn loses value before they can spend it. Prices change daily, sometimes hourly. Savings become worthless overnight. Planning for the future becomes impossible when the value of currency cannot be predicted even for the next week. This is what was happening in Venezuela while someone allegedly swam in an infinity pool overlooking the Caribbean Sea. While children searched through garbage for food, someone allegedly dined on gourmet meals prepared in a professional kitchen. While patients died in darkened hospitals, someone allegedly flew between countries in a private jet. The contrast is not just obscene, it is a moral indictment of everyone who participated in or enabled this theft. Chapter 7. The Exodus. The numbers of Venezuelan refugees tell a story of desperation on a scale rarely seen in the Western Hemisphere. A mass flight from suffering that has reshaped the demographics of an entire continent. Since 2015, nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled their country. It is one of the largest displacement crises in the world, comparable to the Syrian refugee crisis that dominated international headlines for years. The majority of these refugees, approximately 6.7 million, remain in Latin America and the Caribbean, where they have created new communities while struggling to survive in countries that often view them with suspicion or hostility. Colombia alone hosts 2.8 million Venezuelan migrants, a number that would strain the resources of any country, but is particularly challenging for a nation that is still recovering from its own decades of internal conflict. Peru hosts another 1.5 million. They can be found in Ecuador, Brazil, Chile, Panama, Mexico, and beyond, wherever there is hope of work and safety. Many of these refugees have crossed the deadly Darien Gap jungle on foot, one of the most dangerous migration routes in the world. The Darien Gap is a 60-mile stretch of roadless wilderness between Colombia and Panama, a dense jungle filled with venomous snakes, dangerous rivers, criminal gangs, and countless opportunities to die. There are no roads through the Darien Gap because the terrain is too difficult and the ecosystem too fragile. People who cross it do so on foot, carrying their children and whatever possessions they can manage. UNICEF reports that in 2024, 800,000 people, including 160,000 children and teenagers, were expected to cross the Darien Gap jungle as part of the ongoing migration crisis. These migrants face robbery, sexual violence, drowning, and death in a jungle that shows no mercy. Bodies are found regularly along the trails. Children die from dehydration or disease. Women are raped by gangs that prey on the vulnerable. They make this journey because staying in Venezuela seemed even worse. That is perhaps the most damning indictment of all. That walking through a deadly jungle with your children is preferable to remaining in your own country under the rule of your own government. That the certain dangers of the Darien Gap are more acceptable than the certain misery of life in Venezuela. The stories of individual migrants are heartbreaking in their particularity. Doctors who spent years training to save lives and now work as street vendors in foreign cities. Engineers who designed buildings and bridges and now work as day laborers on construction sites. Teachers who educated generations of children and now clean houses for minimum wage. The professional class of Venezuela has been scattered across a dozen countries, their skills and training wasted because their homeland could not use them. Parents who sent their children ahead because they could not afford to feed them. Families separated across multiple countries, connected only by occasional phone calls in the hope of eventual reunion. Elderly parents left behind because they could not survive the journey, waiting in empty apartments for children they may never see again. Consider what it means to walk away from everything. Your home, your neighborhood, your city, your job, your career, the life you built over decades, your friends, your extended family, everyone you have ever known, your language, your culture, the food you grew up eating, and the music you grew up hearing. All of it abandoned because your government made it impossible to survive. This is what 8 million Venezuelans have done. They have walked away from everything because everything had become nothing under the rule of Maduro's government. All of this happened while Maduro's network allegedly accumulated $700 million in luxury assets. While children walked through the jungle, someone allegedly bred horses on a private farm. While families went hungry, someone allegedly drove 9 luxury vehicles. While mothers carried babies through deadly swamps, someone allegedly relaxed in a mansion with 9 bedrooms and an infinity pool. The contrast is almost too painful to contemplate, but it must be contemplated because it is the truth. Chapter 8. Salt Bay and the Empanada. If there was a single moment that captured the obscenity of the contrast between Maduro's lifestyle and his people's suffering, it came in September 2018. Maduro visited Istanbul, Turkey, where he dined at one of Salt Bay's luxury restaurants. Salt Bay, the celebrity chef famous for his dramatic meat-slicing videos on social media, personally served Maduro and his wife Celia Flores a meat-heavy meal at his steakhouse. The restaurant was known for its outrageously expensive cuts of beef, some priced at hundreds of dollars per serving. Maduro was presented with a personalized shirt and a box of cigars with his name engraved. The video of Maduro smoking cigars and eating expensive steak while Salt Bay performed his signature salt-sprinkling gesture went viral. Venezuelans were outraged. Here was their president, who constantly lectured about socialism and equality, feasting on luxury food that most of his countrymen could not even imagine while they struggled to find basic staples like bread and milk. But the Salt Bay incident was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern. Despite the majority of Venezuelans losing weight due to hunger, members of Maduro's administration appeared to gain weight. The contrast was visible and damning. In November 2017, while giving a lengthy live television broadcast, Maduro, apparently unaware he was still being filmed, pulled an empanada out of his desk drawer, began eating it. This occurred amid controversy over Maduro's obvious weight gain during a nationwide food and medicine shortage. Social media exploded with criticism. Here was the president snacking on camera while his people could not afford to eat. These moments revealed something important about Maduro's relationship with his suffering nation. He seemed completely indifferent to it. While urging Venezuelans to raise rabbits for food because they could not afford protein, while telling them to grow vegetables in urban gardens because markets were empty, Maduro lived a life of comfort and luxury that had nothing to do with the reality he imposed on his people. Chapter 9. The Cartel of the Suns. The alleged source of much of Maduro's wealth was not just corruption of oil revenues, according to U.S. prosecutors and international investigators. Maduro led one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the Western Hemisphere, the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns. The name refers to the sun-shaped insignia worn by generals in the Venezuelan military, a symbol of the highest ranks of the armed forces. The cartel allegedly operated within these ranks, using the power and resources of the Venezuelan state to protect and expand its drug trafficking operations. It was a merger of government and organized crime that turned Venezuela into a narco state, a country where the distinction between law enforcement and criminal enterprise had been deliberately erased. In 2020, federal prosecutors in Manhattan charged Maduro and several top Venezuelan officials with narco-terrorism and conspiracy to import cocaine into the United States. The indictment was extraordinary in its scope and its allegations. It traced Maduro's rise within the Cartel of the Suns from facilitator to leader. It detailed how the cartel allegedly used Venezuelan military and government infrastructure to move cocaine from Colombia through Venezuela to destinations around the world. Prosecutors said that after Hugo Chávez's death in 2013, Maduro evolved from a facilitator into the cartel's top leader, merging its operations with the Venezuelan state to shield it from prosecution. The government and the cartel became indistinguishable. Military officers who were supposed to fight drug trafficking allegedly participated in it. Police who were supposed to arrest traffickers allegedly protected them. Courts that were supposed to prosecute crimes allegedly dismissed charges against connected defendants. Court documents alleged that the cartel's objective went beyond profit. It sought to flood the United States with cocaine as a deliberate means of causing social harm to a country the regime viewed as an enemy. The drug trafficking was allegedly both a revenue source and a weapon, a way to make money while simultaneously damaging American communities. Every overdose death, every family destroyed by addiction, every community plagued by drug violence was allegedly a victory for the Maduro regime. The Drug Enforcement Administration claimed that in one recent year alone, it intercepted 30 tons of narcotics originating from Venezuela, with 7 tons traced directly to Maduro's network. These are not small quantities moved by street-level dealers. These are industrial quantities moved by an organization with the resources of a state. 7 tons of cocaine represents billions of dollars in street value and countless lives destroyed. Some of these shipments were allegedly combined with fentanyl, increasing their lethality on American streets exponentially. Fentanyl is so potent that a quantity invisible to the naked eye can be lethal. When combined with cocaine, it creates a product that kills users who have no idea what they are consuming. The deliberate mixing of fentanyl with cocaine suggests an intent not just to profit from addiction, but to maximize death. Intelligence reports estimated that at least 250 tons of cocaine transited through Venezuela annually as of several years ago. That volume has possibly doubled since then, as the Maduro regime allegedly turned to drug trafficking to compensate for the collapse of oil income caused by international sanctions. As legitimate revenue sources dried up, illegitimate sources allegedly expanded to fill the gap. The partnerships that enabled this trafficking were extensive and terrifying. Prosecutors alleged that Maduro's network worked with the notorious Tren de Aragua gang, one of the most violent criminal organizations in the hemisphere. Tren de Aragua originated in Venezuelan prisons and has since expanded across South America and into the United States, bringing extortion, kidnapping, and murder wherever it operates. They allegedly collaborated with Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. They allegedly maintained connections with FARC, the Colombian guerrilla group turned drug trafficking organization that had fought a decades-long war against the Colombian state. This was the alleged reality behind the socialist rhetoric. A government that functioned as a drug cartel, enriching its leaders while destroying both Venezuela and the communities in other countries where the drugs were sold. The revolution that was supposed to help the poor was allegedly poisoning them with cocaine and fentanyl. The leader who claimed to fight imperialism was allegedly waging chemical warfare against American communities. Chapter 10. The Wife and the First Family. Celia Flores, Venezuela's First Lady, was not merely a passive beneficiary of her husband's alleged corruption. According to investigators, she was an active participant in the network that looted the country. Flores had been a prominent figure in Venezuelan politics long before Maduro became president. She helped win Hugo Chávez's release from prison in the 1990s. She served in the National Assembly and became its president. She built her own power base within the Chavista movement. Critics referred to her inner circle as the Flores clan, a network of family members and associates who allegedly used their political connections for personal enrichment. Her 3 sons from a previous relationship were sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury. 2 of her nephews were convicted in New York in 2016 of conspiring to smuggle cocaine into the United States. The cocaine conviction of Flores' nephews was particularly damaging because it exposed for the first time the first family's alleged connection to drug trafficking. The nephews had been arrested in Haiti in 2015 while allegedly trying to arrange a shipment of 800 kilograms of cocaine. They were convicted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Flores herself has been accused of using her political influence to amass wealth, including allegedly owning a shopping center in Miami. The family reportedly owns properties in Miami, Spain, and the Dominican Republic. Maduro's brother, José David Maduro, has been accused of using political connections to acquire assets, including a luxury apartment in Madrid. The pattern was consistent across the extended family. Public service as a vehicle for private enrichment, revolutionary rhetoric masking systematic looting, socialist ideology covering capitalist greed. Chapter 11. The Food as Weapon. One of the most insidious aspects of the Maduro regime's corruption was its alleged use of food as a tool of political control. While insiders allegedly stole billions from programs meant to feed the hungry, the government distributed what remained through systems that rewarded political supporters and punished anyone who dared to oppose the regime. The CLAP program, which was supposed to distribute boxes of subsidized food to Venezuelan households, became notorious for its political manipulation. CLAP stands for Comités Locales de Abastecimiento y Producción, local committees for supply and production. In theory, it was a humanitarian program to help families survive the economic crisis. In practice, it became a mechanism of surveillance and control. Recipients were allegedly required to demonstrate political loyalty to receive food. Those who attended government rallies, who voted for regime candidates, who displayed signs of support for the Bolivarian Revolution, received their boxes. Opposition supporters were allegedly denied access, their families left to starve as punishment for their political beliefs. The boxes themselves became tools of surveillance used to track and control the population, to identify who was loyal and who was suspect. The contents of the CLAP boxes were often inadequate, containing basic staples that could not sustain a family for a month. But even this inadequate food was withheld from those deemed politically unreliable. Imagine watching your children go hungry because you voted for the wrong candidate or attended the wrong rally or simply failed to display sufficient enthusiasm for the regime. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin directly accused the Maduro network of using food for social control in his announcement of sanctions against regime figures. They use food as a form of social control to reward political supporters and punish opponents, he said, all the while pocketing hundreds of millions of dollars through a number of fraudulent schemes. The corruption in food distribution was systematic and pervasive at every level. Government contracts for food imports were allegedly awarded to connected businessmen who provided kickbacks to officials. The food that was supposed to reach hungry Venezuelans was allegedly diverted to black markets, resold at inflated prices, or simply never delivered. The prices paid by the government for food imports were allegedly inflated far above market rates, with the difference pocketed by officials and their business partners. Alex Saab, the Colombian businessman who became one of the most prominent figures associated with the Maduro network, allegedly made hundreds of millions of dollars through government contracts for food imports. He was the middleman who connected the regime's need for food with international suppliers willing to participate in corrupt schemes. His contracts were allegedly obtained through bribes paid to Maduro's stepsons and other connected figures. He was eventually extradited to the United States to face money laundering charges. For ordinary Venezuelans, the result was hunger amid theoretical abundance. Venezuela had money to buy food from international markets. It had officials claiming to distribute food through official programs, but somehow, mysteriously, the food never reached the people who needed it most. It disappeared into a corrupt system that enriched the powerful at the expense of the desperate, that turned hunger into profit and suffering into political control. Chapter 12. The International Response. As evidence of Maduro's alleged corruption accumulated, the international community responded with sanctions designed to cut off the regime from the global financial system. But these efforts faced constant challenges as the regime found new ways to hide and move its money. The United States imposed sweeping sanctions on Venezuela, targeting its oil sector, senior officials, and state-owned companies. The European Union followed with its own sanctions. Individual countries froze assets and banned travel by sanctioned officials. The $700 million in assets seized by the U.S. in 2025 represented the largest single action against a sitting foreign leader's alleged wealth. Attorney General Bondi framed it as a message. Washington is sending a clear message that stolen or illicitly obtained wealth is not safe in the United States, even when protected by layers of offshore corporations and political influence. The U.S. also increased the bounty for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $50 million, the highest ever offered for a sitting head of state. It surpassed previous bounties for figures like former Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega and Mexican drug Lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But enforcement remained challenging. The Maduro network allegedly used sophisticated money laundering techniques that spanned multiple jurisdictions. Shell companies in Panama and the British Virgin Islands, bank accounts in Switzerland and the Bahamas, real estate in Florida and Spain. Luxury goods that could be moved across borders. Each time investigators closed one avenue, the network allegedly found another. The scale of the global financial system provided endless opportunities for hiding illicit wealth, and the Maduro network allegedly exploited every one of them. Chapter 13. The victims. Behind every statistic about Venezuelan poverty is a human story of suffering that statistics cannot capture. Numbers describe the scale of a crisis, but not its texture, not the daily reality of living through catastrophe. These individual stories are the true measure of the corruption that funded Maduro's alleged mansions. Consider the mother in Caracas who watches her child grow thinner each week because she cannot afford food. She works when she can find work. which is rarely in an economy that has collapsed. She stands in line for hours, hoping to receive a clap box that may or may not come, knowing that her receipt of food depends on demonstrating political loyalty to a regime she despises. She has already lost one child to a preventable illness because the hospital had no medicine, no equipment, no electricity to power the machines that might have saved his life. She wonders every day whether her surviving children will live to adulthood, whether she's raising children or merely delaying their deaths. Consider the doctor who spent years training to save lives and now cannot practice because her hospital has no supplies. She studied medicine because she wanted to help people, because healing the sick seemed like the most important work a person could do. Now she watches patients die of diseases that should be easily treatable. The operating rooms are dark because there is no electricity. The pharmacy is empty because there is no medicine. The diagnostic equipment sits silent because there are no parts to repair it. She earns less per month than the cost of a single meal at a restaurant in Miami where wealthy Venezuelans dine. She has thought about leaving but cannot afford the journey and cannot bear to abandon her patients who have no one else. Consider the young man who walked through the Darien Gap, one of the most dangerous jungles in the world, because staying in Venezuela meant slow starvation. He was an engineer before the economy collapsed, designing infrastructure for a country that was supposed to become prosperous. He lost his job when the company closed. He lost his savings when inflation destroyed the value of the currency. He lost hope when he realized that no matter how hard he worked, he could not earn enough to survive. So he walked. He saw people die on the journey, bodies abandoned on the trail because there was no way to bury them. He was robbed twice by gangs who prey on migrants. He watched children cry from hunger and exhaustion. He arrived in another country with nothing but the clothes on his back and the hope that life could be better somewhere else. Consider the grandmother who remembers when Venezuela was prosperous, when Caracas was a modern city that visitors compared to Miami, when Venezuelans traveled abroad for shopping and vacation rather than to escape starvation. She grew up in a country with a future. She raised her children in a country that was developing. She watched that country destroyed by ideology and corruption until it became unrecognizable. She cannot understand how everything fell apart so quickly, how a nation blessed with such natural wealth could become so desperately poor. She rations her food, eats one meal a day because that is all she can afford, and prays that she will not need medical care because she knows there is none available for someone without connections or money. Consider the teacher who dedicated her life to education and now cannot afford to eat lunch. She goes to work hungry because her salary is worthless. She teaches children who come to school hungry because their families cannot feed them. She watches talented students drop out because they need to work or because their families have fled the country. She knows that she is witnessing the destruction of a generation, the loss of human potential on a scale that will take decades to repair. She teaches anyway because she does not know what else to do. These are the people whose birthright was stolen. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It should be one of the richest countries in the hemisphere. Its people should have health care and education and opportunity. Instead, its people starve while their leaders allegedly live in oceanfront mansions with infinity pools and private terraces overlooking the Caribbean Sea. Each of these victims has a name, a family, a story that deserves to be told. Multiply them by millions and you begin to understand the scale of what was stolen from Venezuela. Not just money, not just oil wealth, but lives. Human lives destroyed by corruption. Chapter 14. The defense. The Maduro regime has consistently denied all allegations of corruption. Official statements dismissed the asset seizures and bounties as political theater and crude propaganda operations designed to distract from U.S. domestic problems. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil labeled the seizures and the increased bounty as a smokescreen and insisted that the Venezuelan government would not be intimidated by foreign pressure. the regime portrayed itself as a victim of U.S. imperialism rather than a perpetrator of corruption. Maduro himself has cultivated an image as a plain-speaking everyman motivated by ideology rather than personal gain. In his frequent television appearances, he presents himself as a defender of the poor against the rich, a socialist fighting against capitalist exploitation, a leader who cares more about his people than about material wealth. This image has always been difficult to reconcile with the evidence: the Salt Bay dinner, the empanada on television, the weight gain amid a famine, the properties in foreign countries, the private jets, the jewelry, the cash. Supporters of the regime argue that sanctions are responsible for Venezuela's economic collapse, that the country would be prosperous if not for U.S. economic warfare. There is some truth to the claim that sanctions have caused additional hardship. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food acknowledged that sanctions have been one factor, among others, constraining the government's fiscal capacity to implement social protection programs and provide basic public services. But sanctions cannot explain why Maduro's network allegedly accumulated $700 million in luxury assets. Sanctions cannot explain why the president's stepsons were allegedly involved in laundering billions. Sanctions cannot explain the systematic looting of PDVSA, which began long before the most severe sanctions were imposed. The regime's defense ultimately fails to address the central question: if Maduro was truly motivated by socialist ideology and concern for the poor, why did his inner circle allegedly live like oligarchs? Chapter 15. The Pattern of Dictators. Maduro's alleged corruption fits a pattern that has repeated throughout history with depressing regularity. Authoritarian leaders who claim to represent the people while looting their countries for personal gain. It is a pattern so consistent that it seems almost inevitable, a corruption that infects revolutionary movements and populist governments alike. The pattern is remarkably consistent across different ideologies and different eras, transcending left and right, secular and religious, nationalist and internationalist. The ideology serves as justification and cover, but the underlying dynamic is always the same. Power concentrated in the hands of a few, accountability eliminated, and public resources transformed into private wealth. Consider Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, who championed African nationalism and liberation while allegedly stealing $5 billion from one of the poorest countries in the world. He owned properties across Europe, maintained bank accounts in Switzerland, and lived in luxury while his people struggled with poverty and disease. He claimed to be fighting imperialism while becoming an imperial figure himself, extracting wealth from his nation like any colonial power. Consider Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, who proclaimed martial law to save his nation from communism, while his wife Imelda allegedly accumulated thousands of pairs of shoes, and the family amassed billions in hidden wealth scattered across the globe. The Marcoses lived like royalty, while ordinary Filipinos endured dictatorship and poverty. Their corruption was so blatant that it became a symbol of authoritarian excess worldwide. Consider Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, who preached revolutionary socialism and Pan-African unity while allegedly controlling billions in foreign assets and living in opulent palaces surrounded by female bodyguards. He claimed to have eliminated the state in favor of direct popular rule while actually exercising absolute personal power and enriching his family at the expense of the Libyan people. These leaders share certain characteristics that Maduro appears to exemplify. They rise to power, promising to fight corruption and help the poor, presenting themselves as champions of the ordinary people against elite exploitation. They consolidate control by eliminating opposition, controlling information, and undermining any institution that might check their power. They create networks of family members and cronies who benefit from their rule and who help maintain it. They use state resources as personal piggy banks while maintaining revolutionary rhetoric that grows increasingly hollow. The ideology varies dramatically from case to case, left or right, capitalist or socialist, secular or religious, nationalist or internationalist. What remains constant is the pattern of public service as private enrichment, of power as a license to steal without accountability or consequence. Maduro fits this pattern precisely, as if following a template that has been refined over decades of authoritarian rule. He came to power as the heir to Hugo Chávez's revolutionary movement, promising to continue the fight for socialism and against imperialism. He consolidated control over the legislature, the judiciary, and the electoral system. He built a network of family members and allies who allegedly benefited from his rule, and he allegedly accumulated hundreds of millions in foreign assets while his people starved. The pattern suggests that the ideology was always secondary to the power, always a means rather than an end. The revolutionary rhetoric was a tool for gaining and maintaining control, not a genuine commitment to the welfare of the people it claimed to represent. Chapter 16. The Reckoning. The seizure of $700 million in assets represented a form of accountability that had long seemed impossible. For years, Maduro had appeared untouchable, protected by the power of the Venezuelan state and the difficulty of international enforcement. But the seizures demonstrated that stolen wealth could be traced, frozen, and confiscated even when hidden behind layers of shell companies and foreign jurisdictions. The mansion in the Dominican Republic was seized. The jets were seized. The Florida properties were seized. The horse farm, the cars, the jewelry, the cash, all of it was seized. For the people who allegedly benefited from this wealth, the seizures represented a sudden loss of the lifestyle they had allegedly built on corruption. Properties they could no longer visit, jets they could no longer fly, luxury they could no longer enjoy. But for the Venezuelan people, the seizures represented something else, a validation of what they had long known but could not prove. Their leaders were not simply incompetent or unlucky. They were allegedly thieves on a massive scale, stealing from a nation while that nation collapsed into humanitarian catastrophe. Whether this validation will translate into genuine accountability remains to be seen. Seizing assets is one thing. Bringing the perpetrators to justice is another. Restoring what was stolen to the people from whom it was stolen is yet another. But the seizures at least established a principle. Corruption has consequences. Stolen wealth is not safe. The international community will pursue the proceeds of kleptocracy, even when the kleptocrats seem beyond reach. Chapter 17. What justice looks like. What would justice look like for Venezuela? The question has no easy answer because the scale of the harm is almost incomprehensible. How do you compensate a nation for years of economic collapse? How do you restore the health of children who grew up malnourished? How do you reunite families scattered across a dozen countries? How do you rebuild institutions that have been systematically corrupted? How do you give back the years that were stolen? The seized assets, as substantial as they are, represent only a fraction of what was allegedly stolen. $700 million is a lot of money, but it is not enough to rebuild a country. It is not enough to feed millions of hungry people. It is not enough to rebuild a healthcare system, or an educational system, or an economy. Some argue that the seized assets should be returned directly to the Venezuelan people, perhaps through humanitarian organizations or reconstruction funds. Others argue that they should be held until a legitimate government can receive them. The question of who represents the legitimate government of Venezuela has been contested for years. What is clear is that the seizures alone are not justice. They are a beginning, not an end. True justice would require not just the recovery of stolen assets, but the transformation of the systems that allowed such massive theft in the first place. Chapter 18. The Lessons. The story of Maduro's alleged mansions offers lessons that extend far beyond Venezuela. The first lesson is about the importance of transparency and accountability. The corruption that allegedly enriched Maduro's network flourished because Venezuela's institutions had been systematically undermined. The legislature was controlled by the ruling party. The judiciary was controlled by the executive. The media was controlled by the state. Without independent institutions to expose and punish corruption, stealing became easy and profitable. The second lesson is about the importance of international cooperation. The assets that were seized were located in multiple countries: the Dominican Republic, the United States, and elsewhere. No single country could have traced and seized these assets alone. International cooperation, including information sharing, coordinated enforcement, and diplomatic pressure, was essential. The third lesson is about the human cost of corruption. Corruption is sometimes discussed as an abstract problem, a matter of governance or economics. But the reality of corruption is human suffering on a massive scale. Every dollar allegedly stolen by Maduro's network was a dollar that could have fed hungry children, treated sick patients, or educated struggling students. The mansions and jets and jewelry were built on human misery. The fourth lesson is about the persistence of kleptocracy. Despite decades of international efforts to combat corruption, despite sophisticated financial regulations, despite sanctions and seizures, corrupt leaders continue to loot their countries and hide their wealth. The tools exist to fight kleptocracy, but the political will to use them consistently is often lacking. These lessons apply not just to Venezuela, but to dozens of countries around the world where corruption undermines development and democracy. The fight against kleptocracy is a fight for human dignity itself. Chapter 19. The Survivors. Despite everything, despite the corruption and the starvation and the exodus, Venezuela has not been destroyed. Its people have shown remarkable resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship, finding ways to survive and even to hope when hope seemed impossible. The 8 million who fled have built new lives in new countries, often starting from nothing in places where they know no one and speak the language imperfectly. They work hard, often in jobs far below their qualifications, accepting positions that local workers reject because any work is better than the hunger they escaped. They save money to send home to family members who could not leave. Remittances that keep their relatives alive in a country where survival has become a daily struggle. They have created Venezuelan communities in Colombia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and beyond, maintaining their culture and their connections even as they adapt to new homes. They gather for holidays, cook traditional foods when they can afford the ingredients, speak Spanish with their children so the next generation will not forget where they came from. They hold on to their identity as Venezuelans, even as they build new identities as residents of other countries. Those who stayed in Venezuela have found ways to survive that would have seemed impossible before the crisis. They have created informal economies that function despite the collapse of formal institutions, trading goods and services in networks that operate outside the failed official economy. They have learned to make do with less, to stretch resources that were already stretched beyond breaking, to find substitutes for things that can no longer be obtained. They have helped each other, sharing food and medicine and information in communities that have become survival networks. When one family has a little extra, they share with neighbors who have nothing. When someone needs medicine that cannot be found, word spreads through networks that search until it is located. When the electricity fails and the water stops, neighbors work together to cope with problems that would be impossible to handle alone. Civil society organizations continue to operate despite government repression that grows more severe each year. The regime has passed laws designed to cripple independent organizations, requiring registration and subjecting them to government oversight that is really government control. But activists continue their work, documenting abuses and providing services that the government cannot or will not provide. Journalists continue to report despite censorship and harassment that makes their work dangerous. Many have been arrested or forced into exile. Those who remain take risks every day to tell the truth about what is happening in their country. They use social media and international outlets to bypass government control of traditional media, finding ways to reach audiences both inside and outside Venezuela. Human rights defenders continue to document abuses despite the risks that documentation brings. They interview victims, collect evidence, prepare reports for international organizations. Their work provides the foundation for future accountability, creating a record of crimes that will, one day, they hope, lead to justice. The opposition continues to organize despite arrests and exile that have decimated its leadership. Leaders have fled to other countries or been imprisoned on charges that are transparently political. But new leaders emerge to replace those who are silenced, maintaining a democratic alternative that refuses to disappear despite every effort to destroy it. The Venezuelan diaspora has become a political force in its own right, advocating for their country from the safety of foreign shores. Exiles lobby governments and international organizations. They provide evidence to investigators pursuing corruption and human rights abuses. They keep the world's attention focused on Venezuela's crisis, when it would be easier for the international community to look away and focus on other problems. This resilience suggests that Venezuela's story is not over. The country has been devastated by corruption and misrule, reduced from prosperity to desperation in barely 2 decades. But it has not been extinguished. The Venezuelan people have survived, and they continue to fight for a better future. They believe that one day their country will recover, that the corruption will end, that the stolen wealth will be recovered, that justice will come. They may be wrong, but they refuse to give up hope. Chapter 20. The Final Accounting. In the end, the story of Maduro's alleged mansions is a story about choices. Choices made by individuals who had the power to help their country and allegedly chose instead to loot it. Choices made by a network of family members and cronies who allegedly participated in the theft. Choices made by banks and businesses and governments that allegedly facilitated the corruption. These choices had consequences measured in human lives, in children who died of preventable diseases, in families torn apart by migration, in dreams destroyed by poverty, in a nation that had everything and was left with nothing. The mansions themselves are now empty or seized. The jets sit on tarmacs, grounded by sanctions and seizure orders. The jewelry and cars and cash have been confiscated. The lifestyle that corruption allegedly built has been, at least partially, dismantled. But the damage remains. Venezuela will spend decades recovering from what was allegedly done to it. The scars of hunger and disease and displacement will mark a generation. The institutions that were corrupted will have to be rebuilt from scratch. This is the dark story of Maduro's secret mansions. Not just a story of luxury properties and private jets, but a story of what happens when power is used for theft rather than service. A story of what happens when ideology is used as cover for greed. A story of what happens when a nation's wealth is stolen by those who claim to protect it. If this story has moved you, I encourage you to subscribe and share it with others who need to know. The world must understand what happened in Venezuela and what continues to happen in countries around the world where corrupt leaders loot their nations while their people suffer. Tell me in the comments, what do you think should happen to the seized assets? Should they be returned to Venezuela? If so, how? And what do you think can be done to prevent this kind of massive corruption in other countries? Your thoughts matter. Thank you for watching and for caring about the people whose suffering funded these mansions. The Venezuelans who starved while someone allegedly swam in an infinity pool deserve to have their story told. And they deserve a world that holds the powerful accountable for their crimes against the powerless. Until next time.